What kind of community turns a dream home into a $30,000 nightmare? My name is Ellie Harper, and I thought I'd found paradise when I bought a plot of land just beyond the pristine gates of Willow Creek Estates. The air was crisp, scented with pine and freedom, and the rolling hills promised a quiet life away from the city's roar. My plan was simple: build a modest cabin, a sanctuary for my family, on land I'd scrimped and saved for over a decade. But Willow Creek's Homeowners Association had other ideas. They slapped me with a $30,000 fine for a cabin they claimed violated their rules that shouldn't even apply to my property, which sat just outside their jurisdiction. I was an outsider in their eyes, a threat to their manicured utopia, and they were determined to crush me. This is the story of how I fought back, how secrets unraveled, and how a small cabin sparked a battle that shook an entire community to its core. The sun hung low, painting the hills gold as I drove my beat-up pickup to the edge of my land. I'd spent months sketching the cabin, every beam and window a piece of my heart. My daughter, Mia, only 7, would squeal about her forest castle, her eyes bright with dreams of firefly nights. My husband, Tom, a quiet carpenter, had already started carving the doorframe, his calloused hands steady with purpose. We weren't rich, far from it, but this land was ours, paid for with every overtime shift and skipped vacation. The deed was clear, 2.3 acres, just beyond Willow Creek's boundary. No HOA, no covenants, just freedom. Or so I thought. The first letter arrived 3 months into construction. It was crisp, official, embossed with the Willow Creek Estates logo, a stylized tree that screamed money. Cease and desist, it demanded, claiming my cabin violated their architectural guidelines. I laughed at first. My land wasn't part of their gated enclave. I owed them nothing. But the letters kept coming, each one sharper, threatening legal action, fines, even a lien on my property. I called their office, expecting a misunderstanding, but the voice on the other end was cold. "You're affecting our property values," a woman named Karen snapped. "Your cabin looks like a shack. It's an eyesore." An eyesore? My cabin wasn't even visible from their community, tucked behind a ridge and a thicket of oaks. I hung up, my hands shaking, and told Tom we'd ignore it. They had no power over us. But Karen wasn't just a voice. She was the HOA president, a woman who wielded her title like a scepter. I'd seen her at the county office once, her blonde bob immaculate, her heels clicking with authority. She was the kind of person who smiled while twisting the knife. By the time the $30,000 fine arrived, stapled to a lawsuit threat, I realized this wasn't about rules. It was personal. Karen and her board saw my family as intruders, poor folk daring to build near their exclusive haven. I wasn't going to let them bully me. I hired a lawyer, Sarah, a no-nonsense single mom who'd grown up fighting her own battles. "They're overreaching," she said, her eyes scanning the HOA's charter. "Your land's outside their jurisdiction. This is harassment." Her words lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for my cabin. I was fighting for my family's future. The battle lines were drawn at the county courthouse, a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and desperation. I stood outside, clutching Mia's hand, as Tom paced nervously. Sarah had uncovered something, a map in the county records showing Willow Creek's boundaries, which stopped 100 yards short of my property. The HOA had no legal claim over us. But Karen wasn't backing down. She arrived in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 board members, their faces smug. "You'll lose everything," she hissed as she passed me, her perfume sharp enough to choke. I wanted to scream, but Mia's small hand in mine kept me grounded. This wasn't just about money. It was about standing up to people who thought they could control everyone else's dreams. Sarah built our case brick by brick. She found emails between Karen and the board discussing how my cabin lowered the neighborhood's prestige. They'd even hired a surveyor to redraw the boundary lines, trying to claim my land retroactively. It was audacious, illegal, and, Sarah said, provable. But the HOA had deep pockets, funded by residents who paid thousands in dues for their perfect lawns and gated security. I lay awake at night, my stomach knotted, wondering if we could outlast them. Tom tried to keep things light, joking about turning the cabin into a fortress, but I saw the worry in his eyes. Mia stopped talking about her For's castle. The weight of it all was crushing us. Then came the twist, the kind of revelation that turns anger into something sharper. Sarah dug deeper and found a bombshell. Karen's husband, a real estate developer, had been buying up land around Willow Creek, including a parcel adjacent to mine. If they could force me out, they stood to profit by flipping my land for a luxury development. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was greed, plain and simple. Sarah uncovered financial records showing Karen had funneled HOA funds to her husband's company for consulting fees. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, it was corrupt. My fight wasn't just personal anymore, it was about exposing a system that preyed on people like me. The courtroom buzzed with tension as our case began. Karen sat across from us, her face a mask of confidence, but I noticed her fingers twitching. Sarah presented the boundary map, the emails, the financial records. The judge, an older man with a weary expression, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as Sarah laid out the HOA scheme. I testified about the sleepless nights, the fear of losing our dream, the way Mia's laughter had faded. Tom spoke next, his voice steady but raw, describing the hours he'd poured into the cabin, every nail a promise to our daughter. The room felt electric, like a storm about to break. Karen's lawyer tried to paint us as reckless opportunists, but Sarah countered with evidence of their overreach. The judge's gavel hung in the air, a symbol of everything we stood to lose or gain. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, every whisper and shuffled paper amplifying the stakes. I sat rigid, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles whitened as Sarah dismantled the HOA's defense. Karen's lawyer, a slick man named Greg with a perpetual smirk, argued that Willow Creek's community standards extended beyond their legal boundaries, a vague moral obligation to maintain the area's prestige. It was nonsense, and Sarah tore it apart. She projected the county map on a screen, a stark line showing my land clearly outside their domain. "They have no authority," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "This is a vendetta, plain and simple." The judge's pen scratched notes, his face unreadable, but I saw Karen shift in her seat, her composure cracking like thin ice. Mia was with my sister that day, spared the courtroom's intensity, but I felt her absence like a weight. She'd started drawing pictures of the cabin again, but now they had dark clouds overhead, her crayons pressing harder than a 7-year-old should. Tom reached for my hand under the table, his thumb tracing circles, grounding me. Sarah called a witness, the county surveyor, who confirmed the boundary lines hadn't changed in decades. Greg tried to spin it, claiming my cabin's rustic look devalued nearby properties, but Sarah was ready. She presented a real estate appraisal showing my land's value was unaffected by Willow Creek's rules. The courtroom murmured, and I caught a flicker of panic in Karen's eyes. She wasn't used to losing. The twist deepened when Sarah introduced the financial records. Karen's husband, Richard, sat in the gallery, his face pale as Sarah revealed his company's transactions. The HOA had paid him over $50,000 in consulting fees for projects that never materialized, money siphoned from residents' dues. Gasps rippled through the room. A few Willow Creek residents, present to support Karen, exchanged uneasy glances. Sarah pressed harder, showing emails where Karen instructed the board to target my property specifically, calling it a blight that threatened their expansion plans. The judge's brow furrowed, and I felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about exposing a web of corruption. But Karen wasn't done. She took the stand, her voice syrupy with false sincerity. "We're protecting our community," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Ms. Harper's structure undermines everything we've built." It was a performance, and Greg leaned into it, painting me as a defiant outsider who didn't respect their values. I wanted to scream that their values were built on greed, but Sarah kept me calm. "Let the truth do the talking," she whispered. She cross-examined Karen, her questions sharp and unrelenting. "Did you know your husband stood to profit from Miss Harper's land?" Karen stammered, her face flushing. "Did you direct HOA funds to his company?" The room went silent, and Karen's silence was louder than any answer. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with tension. A small crowd had gathered: local reporters, curious residents, and a few HOA members who'd started questioning Karen's leadership. I saw a woman, Linda, who lived in Willow Creek and had once waved to Mia at the grocery store. She approached me, her face apologetic. "I didn't know," she said softly. "Karen told us your cabin was dragging down our home values." "I'm so sorry." Her words hit me like a punch. The HOA's lies had turned neighbors against us, but now cracks were forming in their loyalty. Linda's husband, a retired accountant, had started digging into the HOA's finances after our case made headlines. What he found, more misallocated funds, only fueled the fire. Back in court, Sarah called Linda's husband, Mark, as a surprise witness. He testified about discrepancies in the HOA's budget, money funneled to shell companies tied to Richard. The judge's patience was thinning, and Greg's objections grew frantic. Karen's mask was slipping. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, her hands gesturing wildly. I felt a surge of adrenaline. We were winning, but the cost was steep. Legal fees were eating into our savings, and the cabin's construction had stalled, its frame exposed to the elements. Tom and I argued at night, not out of anger, but exhaustion, wondering if we'd made a mistake taking on a Goliath like Willow Creek. Mia overheard us once, her small voice asking, "Are we losing our castle?" I hugged her tight, promising we'd fight to the end. The climax loomed as Sarah prepared her closing argument. She'd found one last piece of evidence, a recorded HOA meeting where Karen admitted to stretching their authority to protect our investments. It was damning, and Sarah played it for the court, Karen's voice echoing through the speakers, smug and unapologetic. The judge's face hardened, and even Greg's smirk vanished. I looked at Tom, his eyes shining with cautious hope. We poured everything into this fight, our money, our energy, our dreams. The cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was our defiance, our refusal to let people like Karen dictate our lives. As Sarah sat down, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, signaling a recess, but the tension didn't break, it thickened. I stepped outside, the autumn air biting my cheeks, and saw the crowd had grown. A local news van was parked nearby, its camera trained on the courthouse steps. Someone had scrawled "Justice for Ellie" on a piece of cardboard, and it bobbed above the heads of a few supporters. I wasn't used to this attention, strangers rooting for me, but it felt like a lifeline. Tom wrapped an arm around me, his warmth steadying my nerves. Sarah joined us, her face grim but determined. "We've got them on the ropes," she said, "but Karen's not going down without a fight." She was right. Inside, Karen was huddled with Greg, their heads bent together, plotting their next move. Back in the courtroom, Greg called a surprise witness, a Willow Creek resident named Paul, a retired architect with a stern face. He testified that my cabin's substandard design could destabilize the area's aesthetic, lowering property values. It was a weak argument, but Paul's credentials gave it weight. Sarah cross-examined him, exposing that he'd been paid by Richard's company for consulting on the same project tied to my land. The coincidence was too glaring, and Paul fumbled under Sarah's questions, his credibility crumbling. The judge's pen moved faster, his expression darkening. I felt a flicker of triumph, but it was fleeting. Karen's stare burned into me from across the room, her eyes promising retribution. The twist that shook me came that evening, after court adjourned. Linda, the neighbor who'd apologized, called me in tears. She'd found a letter in her mailbox, Anonymous, but clearly from someone in the HOA warning her to stop supporting me or face consequences. It wasn't just me they were targeting now. They were intimidating anyone who questioned their authority. Linda's voice trembled as she read the letter aloud, and I felt a chill. This wasn't just about money or land. It was about control, about silencing anyone who dared to defy Willow Creek's iron grip. I told Linda to give the letter to Sarah, who filed it, as evidence of harassment. The stakes were higher now, and I felt the weight of every decision we'd made. The next day, Sarah used the letter to paint a broader picture of the HOA's tactics. She called more witnesses, residents who'd faced similar threats for minor infractions, like planting unapproved flowers or parking an RV in their driveway. Their stories were eerily similar. Fines, legal threats, and a sense of being watched. The courtroom buzzed with unease as the HOA's image as a protective community unraveled. Karen's face was a mask of fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. Greg tried to redirect, claiming the HOA was simply enforcing rules for the greater good, but the judge wasn't buying it. He leaned forward, asking pointed questions about the HOA's financial transparency. Karen's answers were evasive, and I saw a sweat bead on her forehead. Outside, the community was fracturing. Posts on X from Willow Creek residents showed a growing divide. Some defended Karen, calling her a strong leader, while others demanded an audit of the HOA's finances. A local reporter tweeted a photo of the courthouse, captioned, "Small cabin, big fight. Is Willow Creek's HOA hiding dirty secrets?" The image showed the steps where I'd stood earlier with my cardboard sign supporters in the background. Scrawled on a tree trunk in the corner, in bold red paint, were the words, "HOA's greed exposed." It was raw, natural, blending into the scene without overwhelming it, yet it screamed the heart of our fight. The photo captured the tension perfectly. The crowd, the courthouse, the crisp fall air charged with defiance. Back home, Mia was quieter than ever. She'd overheard Tom and me discussing the threats against Linda, and her small hands clutched her crayons like a shield. I sat her down, promising we'd protect our cabin, but her eyes searched mine for truth. "Why do they hate us, Mommy?" she asked, and my heart broke. I didn't have an answer, not one that could make sense to a child. Tom built a fire that night, and we sat in the half-finished cabin, its walls still open to the stars. The scent of pine and sawdust wrapped around us, a reminder of why we were fighting. I vowed to keep going, not just for us, but for everyone the HOA had bullied. Sarah warned us the HOA might escalate. "They're cornered," she said, "and cornered animals are dangerous." She was right. The next day, Greg filed a counterclaim, accusing me of defamation for spreading false stories about the HOA's finances. It was a desperate move, but it meant more legal fees, more stress. I felt like I was drowning, but Sarah's voice pulled me back. "They're scared," she said. "This is their last gasp." I clung to her words, but doubt crept in. Could we really win against a machine this powerful? The cabin, our dream, felt so fragile, like it could collapse under the weight of their malice. The courtroom felt smaller each day, the walls closing in as the trial dragged on. Karen's counterclaim hung over us like a storm cloud, but Sarah was relentless. She filed a motion to dismiss it, arguing it was a retaliatory tactic to silence us. The judge agreed, striking it down, but not before Greg painted me as a troublemaker in open court. "Ms. Harper wants to tear down our community's values," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. I wanted to shout that their values were a facade, a cover for greed, but I bit my tongue. Sarah's hand on my arm reminded me to stay focused. We were close, so close, to exposing them completely. The turning point came when Sarah called Richard, Karen's husband, to the stand. He was polished, confident, but his eyes darted nervously as Sarah questioned him about his company's ties to the HOA. She presented bank statements showing transfers from the HOA's account to his firm, labeled as consulting but with no deliverables. Richard claimed they were legitimate fees, but Sarah pressed harder, revealing he'd purchased land adjacent to mine just weeks after the HOA's first letter to me. The implication was clear. They wanted my property to expand their empire. The judge's face was stone, but his questions to Richard were sharp, cutting through the developer's polished answers. Karen's composure shattered. She whispered furiously to Greg, her hands trembling. Outside, the community's unrest was boiling over. More residents joined the call for an audit, and a petition circulated online, demanding Karen's resignation. Ex-posts showed neighbors picketing outside Willow Creek's gates, their signs reading, "No more HOA tyranny." The reporter's photo from earlier had gone viral. The tree trunks, HOA's greed exposed message shared thousands of times. It was a symbol of the fight, raw and unpolished, etched into the bark like a scar. I felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by fear. The HOA had resources we couldn't match, and Karen's desperation made her unpredictable. That night, someone slashed the tires of Sarah's car. She found in the courthouse parking lot a note tucked under the wiper, "Back off." She showed it to me, her face pale but resolute. "They're scared," she said, echoing her earlier words. I wanted to believe her, but the threats were escalating. Tom and I installed a security camera at the cabin, its frame now weathered from months of neglect. Mia slept in our bed, her small body curled against mine, and I lay awake, listening for any sound in the dark. The cabin, once a symbol of hope, felt like a target. Sarah doubled down, filing a motion to subpoena the HOA's full financial records. The judge approved it, and what came back was a goldmine. Years of mismanaged funds, payments to shell companies, and inflated contracts benefiting Karen's inner circle. The courtroom gasped as Sarah laid it out, spreadsheet after spreadsheet projected on the screen. Karen's face was ashen, her hands gripping the table. Greg tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. The evidence was overwhelming, and the residents in the gallery, once Karen's loyal supporters, whispered among themselves, their trust in her crumbling. The collapse came swiftly. A group of Willow Creek residents, led by Linda and Mark, filed a class action lawsuit against the HOA citing fraud and mismanagement. The judge halted our trial to consider consolidating the cases, a move that terrified Karen. Her empire was unraveling, and she knew it. She approached me during a recess, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You'll regret this." I stared her down, my fear replaced by fury. "You underestimated us," I said, my voice steady. Tom stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, and for the first time, I felt stronger than her. The final day of testimony was electric. Sarah called a forensic accountant who detailed the HOA's financial schemes, linking them directly to Karen and Richard. The judge's questions were relentless, and Karen's answers grew incoherent. Greg's confidence was gone. He shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. The residents in the gallery were openly hostile now, some shouting at Karen during breaks. I looked at Tom, his face worn but hopeful, and thought of Mia, waiting at home, her crayons still sketching our cabin. We were so close to victory, but the cost was etched into every line on Tom's face, every sleepless night, every dollar we'd spent. The cabin was still ours, but it felt like a ghost of the dream we'd had. The judge's ruling came on a crisp morning, the courtroom packed with residents, reporters, and curious onlookers. My heart pounded as he cleared his throat, his voice steady but grave. "The evidence is clear," he began. "Willow Creek Estates, HOA, has acted beyond its authority, engaging in harassment, fraud, and financial mismanagement." He declared the $30,000 fine against me null and void, my land unequivocally outside their jurisdiction. He ordered the HOA to pay our legal fees and issued an injunction against further interference with my property. The gavel fell, and the room erupted. Cheers from supporters, gasps from Karen's allies. I turned to Tom, tears streaming down my face, and we held each other, the weight of months lifting, if only slightly. Karen's fall was swift and public. The judge referred her and Richard to the district attorney for potential criminal charges, citing evidence of fraud. The class action lawsuit gained traction, with dozens of residents joining, their stories of intimidation mirroring ours. Karen resigned as HOA president that week. Her name splashed across local news and X posts as a symbol of corruption. The viral photo of the courthouse, with HOA's greed exposed on the tree trunk, became a rallying cry. It was raw, etched into nature, a perfect snapshot of the fight. Me, Tom, Sarah, and a handful of supporters on the steps, the tension palpable in the autumn light. But victory wasn't sweet. The cabin sat unfinished, its beams warped from rain, its windows still just frames. Legal fees had drained our savings, and Mia's drawings now included us, standing together, but with tired eyes. I walked the land one evening, the grass crunching underfoot, and felt the scars of the fight. We'd won, but what cost? Tom joined me, his hand finding mine. "We'll rebuild," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I nodded, but doubt lingered. The HOA's collapse had exposed their greed, but it hadn't erased the fear they'd instilled, the nights I'd lain awake wondering if we'd lose everything. The community began to heal, slowly. Linda and Mark organized a new HOA board, transparent and resident-led, with strict oversight. They invited me to a meeting, not as an enemy, but as a neighbor. I hesitated, still wary, but went for Mia's sake. The room was different, open, with residents sharing ideas, not threats. Linda apologized again, her eyes red, and others followed, their stories of HOA bullying spilling out. It wasn't just us. Karen's reign had hurt so many. I realized our fight had given them a voice, a chance to reclaim their community. It wasn't just about our cabin. It was about standing up to power, about showing that ordinary people could win. Mia started drawing again, her crayons bright with hope. She sketched the cabin as it would be, a warm hearth, wildflowers by the door, fireflies lighting the night. Tom went back to work, his hammer ringing through the hills as he repaired the damage. I joined him, nailing boards beside him, our hands moving together. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of our resilience, proof we could weather any storm. Sarah stopped by one day, her smile tired but proud. "You changed things," she said. "Not just for you, but for everyone." I hugged her, grateful for her fight, her belief in us. The land felt alive again, the pine-scented air carrying promise. We hosted a small gathering when the cabin was finished, just family and a few new friends from Willow Creek. Mia ran through the grass, her laughter echoing, her forest castle finally real. The stars were bright that night, and as I looked at Tom, his face lit by the fire, I felt something new, peace. We'd fought a giant and won, not just for us, but for anyone who'd ever been told their dreams didn't matter. The cabin stood strong, its walls holding our story, our defiance, our love. I still see that photo sometimes, shared on X or pinned to a community board. The courthouse steps, the crowd, the tree trunks screaming, HOA's greed exposed. It's a reminder that truth can cut through lies, that a small family can topple a corrupt empire. We're still healing, still rebuilding, but we're free. And that's worth everything. The aftermath of the trial left Willow Creek fractured but stirring with change. The new HOA board, led by Linda and Mark, held open meetings, their voices a stark contrast to Karen's icy decrees. Residents who'd once feared speaking out now shared stories of fines for petty violations, wrong-colored mailboxes, unapproved garden gnomes. It was as if our fight had cracked open a dam, letting truth and anger flood through. I wasn't part of their community, but they invited me to speak at a meeting to share a story. I stood at the podium, my hands trembling, and told them about Mia's drawings, Tom's calloused hands, the nights we thought we'd lose everything. The room was quiet, but their eyes held empathy, not judgment. For the first time, I felt like we belonged. Rebuilding the cabin became our therapy. Tom and I worked side by side, the rhythm of hammer and nail soothing the wounds of the past year. Mia helped, her small hands painting the doorframe bright blue, her laughter filling the air. The cabin was smaller than we dreamed, its budget slashed by legal fees, but it was ours. Every board told a story of survival. Neighbors from Willow Creek started stopping by, not to complain, but to offer help. One brought lumber, another brought seedlings for a garden. Linda brought a pie, her smile shy but genuine. "We're not all like Karen," she said, and I believed her. The legal fallout continued. The district attorney charged Karen and Richard with fraud, and their assets were frozen pending investigation. Ex-posts buzzed with updates, some gleeful, others angry that it had taken so long. The viral photo of the courthouse steps, with HOA's greed exposed carved into the tree, kept circulating, a symbol of resistance. I saved a copy, tucking it into Mia's sketchbook. It wasn't just a photo, it was proof that we'd fought and won, that a small family could stand against a machine. The words on the tree, bold and raw, felt like they'd grown from the earth itself, a natural cry for justice that didn't disrupt the scene, but amplified it. Sarah became more than our lawyer. She became family. She'd fought her own battles as a single mom, and she understood what the cabin meant to us. She stopped by one evening, her daughter in tow, and we sat on the porch, watching Mia and her daughter chase fireflies. "You didn't just save your home," Sarah said, her voice soft. "You gave people courage." I thought of the residents now auditing their HOA, the petitions for transparency, the way Linda's voice had grown stronger at meetings. Our fight had rippled outward, touching lives we'd never expected. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights I woke in a cold sweat, dreaming of Karen's threats, the slashed tires, the anonymous letter. Tom and I argued more than we used to, the stress of the fight lingering like a bruise. Mia sensed it, her questions sharper now. "Will they come back, Mommy?" I didn't know how to answer, so I held her close, promising we'd always protect her. The cabin was our sanctuary, but it was also a reminder of how fragile dreams could be. We'd won, but the scars remained, etched into every moment of doubt. The community's transformation gave me hope. Willow Creek's new board passed rules limiting fines and requiring financial transparency. Residents voted to lower dues, redirecting funds to community projects like a playground and a shared garden. They invited us to the groundbreaking, and Mia ran through the site, her laughter mingling with other kids. It was a small thing, but it felt like a new beginning. The HOA wasn't perfect, but it was trying, and that was enough for now. I realized our fight had done more than save our cabin. It had shown people they could demand better, that power wasn't absolute. As winter approached, the cabin stood complete, its windows glowing against the snow. We moved in just before Christmas, the air thick with pine and promise. Mia hung her drawings on the walls, her forest castle now real, no dark clouds in sight. Tom built a bookshelf, his hands steady again, and I filled it with books about courage, about standing up. We were still rebuilding. Our savings, our trust, our peace, but we were together. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was a testament to what we'd overcome, a beacon for anyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The first spring in the cabin felt like a rebirth. Wildflowers bloomed around the porch, their colors echoing Mia's drawings. She'd started a new sketchbook, filled with images of us, Tom hammering, me planting, her chasing fireflies under a starry sky. The cabin was modest, its walls bearing the marks of our struggle, but it was home. Neighbors from Willow Creek visited often now, their kids playing with Mia, their laughter weaving a new kind of community. Linda and Mark became regulars, their presence a reminder that we'd all been changed by this fight. They'd taken on the HOA's old guard, and their courage inspired me to keep going, to keep believing in what we'd built. The legal case against Karen and Richard dragged on, but it no longer consumed us. The district attorney uncovered more fraud, and the couple faced mounting charges. Ex-post speculated about jail time, but I didn't care about their punishment. I cared about the future. The new HOA board invited me to consult on their transparency policies, and I agreed, not for revenge, but to ensure no one else faced what we had. I spoke at a regional housing conference, sharing our story to a room of strangers who nodded, their own stories of HOA overreach spilling out afterward. Our fight had become a spark, igniting change far beyond Willow Creek. Sarah's role in our lives grew deeper. She helped us navigate the last of the legal fallout, but more than that, she became a friend. Her daughter and Mia were inseparable, their giggles filling the cabin on playdates. Sarah told me she'd taken on more cases against HOAs, inspired by our victory. "You showed me what's possible," she said, her eyes bright. I felt the same about her. She'd given us a voice when we had none, and I'd never forget it. We toasted to new beginnings one night, the fire crackling, the cabin alive with warmth. The viral photo still surfaced online, its tree trunk message, HOA's greed exposed, a quiet but powerful symbol. It had been painted over months ago, but its impact lingered, shared by activists and homeowners fighting their own battles. I kept a framed copy in the cabin, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. We'd stood up and we'd won. The words, bold and raw, blended into the natural scene, a cry for justice that didn't need to dominate to be heard. It was enough that it was there, etched into our story. Mia's laughter was the heart of our home now. She'd started a firefly club with the neighbor kids, catching bugs in jars and releasing them under the stars. Tom and I watched from the porch, his arm around me, our hands worn but strong. The cabin was more than a building. It was proof that dreams could survive, that love and grit could outlast greed. We'd lost so much, money, sleep, pieces of our innocence, but we'd gained something greater, a belief in ourselves, in the power of standing up, in the strength of community when it's built on trust. As I walked the land one evening, the sun dipping low, I thought of everyone who'd been part of this: Sarah, Linda, Mark, the residents who'd found their voices. Our fight had shown that power could be challenged, that ordinary people could rewrite the rules. The cabin stood tall against the hills, its windows catching the last light, a beacon of resilience. Mia ran to me, her hands full of wildflowers, and I knelt to hug her, the scent of pine and hope wrapping around us. We'd built more than a home. We'd built a legacy, one that would inspire others to fight for what's theirs.